At 0523 local time, two MH-60 Romeo helicopters were skimming 40 feet above the Persian Gulf on what the mission brief called a straightforward strike run. Hit the boats, destroy the mines, go home for breakfast. But this would all change in a matter of seconds. Unknown to them, a Zu-23 gunner on the ridge ahead had been watching their silhouette grow against the dawn sky for 4 minutes, and his finger was already on the trigger before the crew ever saw the pier. Two streams of racers arced across the water like lines drawn with a blowtorch. The Romeo's thin aluminum skin handles small arms fire and not much else. A 23mm round through the transmission housing and the helicopter drops into the Gulf. And right now, those boats were loading mines that had already shut down 20% of the world's daily oil supply over the past 4 nights. The pilot of the Cutlass 61 shoved the collective, the helicopter's altitude control, like a handbrake that points straight up, down, and dropped to 40 feet, below the RG's depression limit, where the gunner physically couldn't angle the barrels low enough to follow. Tracers sailed overhead, but 40 feet created its own problem. If you look here at the rotor disc, each of these 4 blades is 27 feet long that hammers a column of downwash into the ocean that leaves a thermal wake visible on infrared for 30 seconds. Almost a mile of glowing lines painted across the water. Every MANPADS gunner on the island could follow the trail like a lit fuse to the helicopter. A Reaper drone call sign Grim 31 had been watching from 12,000 feet for 6 hours. Loading mines onto a fishing dhow is the maritime equivalent of filling a minivan with hand grenades and driving it onto the freeway. Completely insane, and exactly what you do when your real navy is sitting on the bottom of the Persian Gulf. The Reaper could see mines from 3 miles up. What it couldn't see were the weapons you can't bomb because there's nothing to bomb. A guy with a tube on his shoulder standing in a doorway. The Masag-2 is a shoulder-fired heat-seeking missile, Iran's version of a Stinger handed out to infantry squads the way you'd hand out flashlights before a storm. The garrison had been awake since Bandar Abbas went up in smoke 2 days ago. They could hear the rotors. They knew what was coming. They just couldn't see it yet. At 4 kilometers, the airborne tactical officer in the back seat slew the targeting turret onto the first boat. If you look here under the nose of the Romeo, that's the Anas 44, a forward-looking infrared sensor with a built-in laser designator. The 2 contact mines amid-shift showed up as fat thermal circles on the display. He painted the hole with the laser, an invisible infrared beam the target can't see or detect. Think of it like a cat's laser pointer, except only the Hellfire can see the dot, and the mouse has no idea it's being played with. If you look here at the weapons pylon, each Romeo carries AGM-114 Hellfire missiles, laser-guided, meaning wherever the laser dot sits on the target, the missile follows. The laser is physically touching the hull in real time. The boat jinks, the missile jinks with it, but the ATO has to hold that laser steady for the entire flight time. Break the beam and the Hellfire goes blind. He called rifle. The AGM-114M dropped off the pylon with a white flash that lit the spray cloud like a camera strobe over dark water. And on the ridge, the Zu-23 gunner saw the flash and walked his tracers toward it. 8 seconds of flight time. A $150,000 missile streaking toward a fishing boat carrying mines that could shut down a shipping lane worth $1.7 billion a day. Honestly, one of the better returns on investment the Pentagon has ever gotten. Assuming the crew lived long enough to file the receipt. Impact. The dhow split at the waterline. One of the contact mines detonated in sympathy. A secondary explosion that threw debris 30 m. And here's where 2 problems landed on the crew at the same time. The FLIR went white. If you look here at the infrared display, the sensors saturated like a camera pointed at the sun. Too much heat too fast. Located on the ATO's console is the gain override, a manual dial that forces the FLIR sensitivity back down when the auto adjustment can't keep up. Think of it like manually adjusting your phone's brightness when it freaks out from going to a dark room into sunlight. Except getting it wrong means you can't see the boats that are about to escape. 4 seconds of blank screen. And those 4 seconds were a gift to every gunner on the island. Because the Hellfire flash had just told the Cu-23 crew exactly where the helicopter was hovering. And 60 m east of the gun, an IRGCN soldier was pulling a MSOG-2 from its case. The ATO's hand went to the gain override. On the ridge, the Zu-23 walked tracers toward the hover point. If you look here at the Zu-23 on the ridge, it's a twin-barreled anti-aircraft gun and fires roughly 400 rounds a minute per barrel. No radar required, just a gunner with eyes and a trigger. For the first 4 minutes of the engagement, the pilot's 40-foot altitude kept him below the gun's depression limit. The Hellfire flash just erased that advantage. The Zu-23 crew now had a fixed point of light to aim at instead of a shadow skimming the waves on the breakwater. The MANPADS operator uncapped the seeker and powered it on. 5 seconds to initialize. The ATO needed the FLIR back to designate the next boat. The pilot needed to hold position for the designation. And holding position at 40 feet meant the Zu-23 had a stationary target for the first time in the entire engagement. The picture came back in patches. Pier first, then shapes moving where shapes hadn't been moving 10 seconds ago. Every engine on the pier coughing to life at once. The ATO slid to the second boat and called rifle, and the pilot felt the airframe shudder as a 23mm burst past close enough to hear through the canopy. He held position. The Hellfire needed him to hold the laser for 7 more seconds. The MANPADS seeker needed 3 more seconds to initialize. The math was that simple and that terrible. Second Hellfire hit. No secondary. The mines were inert, still waiting for arming. Third boat was already adrip from the first blast over pressure. Hellfire caught it amidships. 3 boats in 90 seconds. The Zu-23 firing the entire time, and the pier was starting to look like a scrapyard. Cutlass 62 had the worst problem of the morning. The armed boat at the far end. A C-14 fast attack craft with a bow-mounted disc heavy machine gun and 3 mines on the deck had gunned its throttle toward open water at 45 knots. The disc already firing back. Green tracer stitching across the water at 600 rounds a minute, and the MANPADS team on the ridge had finally gotten tone to hit the C-14. The pilot needed altitude. If you look here at the Hellfire's flight profile, the missile needs room to dive onto its target. Fire it flat at 50 feet and the seeker can't tell hull from the ocean. It needed at least 140 feet, but here's the problem. The MASOG-2's infrared sensor locks onto the helicopter's engine exhaust, which burns at around 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit. Below 100 feet, the Gulf surface radiates enough heat that the seeker can't separate engine from ocean, like trying to spot a match in front of a campfire. Above 100 feet, the exhaust silhouettes against the sky and the missile has a clean lock. Go low and the Hellfire can't track the boat. Go high and the MANPADS locks onto his engine. The only survivable airspace was a band about 80 foot tall, and the disc was filling it with tracers from below while the MANPADS waited above. The Reaper confirmed a second MANPADS team on the eastern breakwater. 2 teams on different bearings. Break from one and you fly toward the other. The pilot punched to 140. The ATO slammed the FLIR onto the C-14 center mass, a 14M hull bouncing through its own wake at 45 knots. On the ridge, the MANPADS gunner heard the rotor noise change pitch as the helicopter climbed. His seeker was already growling. Solid tone on the left engine itself from 2 kilometers. The disc gunner walked tracers toward the engine exhaust with a Chinese-made thermal sight. 3 threats converging on one helicopter from 3 different bearings, and the ATO needed steady wings to hold the laser on a 4M target while all 3 tried to take him apart. Rifle. The Hellfire screamed off the rail. Acquired. Dove. The disc kept firing. Rounds close enough, the co-pilot flinched at a tracer crossing 50 meters below the chin bubble. The ATO held the laser. One hand on the controller, the other braced against the airframe. Terminal. The Hellfire punched through fiberglass at the engine housing, and the 3 mines on deck detonated in a chain that threw a fireball visible from 12 miles. The pilot shoved the collective down and dropped below the ridgeline. On the ridge, the MANPADS gunner lowered his MASOG-2. 37 seconds with the tube on his shoulder and the helicopter was gone before a seeker finished cycling. All that training, all that waiting, and the target disappeared before the missile even woke up. His partner was reaching for a second tube. Cutlass 62 was already below the ridgeline and accelerating south, putting limestone between the helicopter and the shoulder-fired missile. The partner lowered the second tube unfired. No sky background, no target, no shot. Cutlass 61 cleaned up what was left. 5th Hellfire caught a boat at the breakwater trying to sneak north like a teenager tiptoeing past the living room at 2 a.m. Except Dad has a thermal camera and a $100,000 missile. 6 hit the last dow still tied to the Ballard. Abu Musa's southern pier was burning end to end. But 60 miles north, a Reaper drone had been watching a harbor that made Abu Musa look like a warm-up. And what was loading at the main pier was about to make every mine they just destroyed look like a rounding error. At 12,000 foot over Bandar Len, the sensor operator stared at his screen from a ground control station 6,000 miles away and did the map that was about to ruin his morning. If you look here at the camera turret under the Reaper's nose, that's the MTSB, a multispectral targeting system. Basically a thermal security camera that can read a license plate from 3 miles up. 8 small boats at the main pier, 3 at a secondary dock, a Tandar-class fast attack craft armed with Nasser-1 cruise missiles. And behind the Tandar, a landing craft 50 m long, flight deck packed with pallets in neat rows. 45 plus naval mines loaded, fused, and already rumbling toward the harbor mouth. More targets than he had Hellfires. And this wasn't going to be a cakewalk. 11 MQ-9 Reapers had been shot down in 11 days. One of the main reasons was Iran's 358 loitering missile. If you look here at the 358's profile, it's a small jet-powered interceptor that hunts on infrared alone. 0 radar emission. No warning on the Reaper's radar warning receiver. Think of your house cat sitting under the bird feeder in the backyard. No movement, no sound, just 2 eyes locked on a sparrow that has no idea it's being watched. Except this cat closes at 190 knots. And every 30 seconds, the sensor operator had to break from the harbor to scan the sky for it. 2 seconds of scanning meant 2 seconds of not designating a boat. Like trying to swat a wasp while parallel parking, the wasp doesn't need to sting you to ruin your day. RIM 31 self-P protection pod under the wing. An electronic countermeasure system that detects incoming threats and deploys countermeasures like a car alarm that also deploys smoke was one of the few Reapers in theater fitted for contested airspace. It was supposed to catch the 358. Supposed to strike authorization arrived 14 seconds after the request. First target a mine layer pulling east. Laser on, rifle. 22 seconds of flight. Holding that beam steady on a 10 m hole through 4,500 meters of Gulf humidity that scattered the laser like headlights in fog. The Hellfire hit clean and the mines cooked off. Secondary caught the adjacent boat. Holes touching, lines tangled, 2 for 1. 6 seconds of FLIR blindness from the double detonation. And when the picture came back, the Tandar's radar had snapped to full power. The gun couldn't reach 12,000 feet. The NASA-1 missile were anti-ship, not anti-air. And the radio was the real threat. The Tandar's captain was transmitting Reaper-bearing altitude orbit track to every air defense node on the coast. Shoreman patch teams on the hills behind the harbor. And here's the problem. Those hills gave the shoulder-fired miss to enough starting altitude that its envelope reached nearly 11,000 feet. The Reaper was at 12,000. That's a margin your mortgage broker would call uncomfortably thin. And the 358 controllers now had a 3 degrees cone painted straight at the Reaper's engine plume 30 seconds before the queuing data reached the shooters. After that, every weapon on the coast was looking for one drone, and the sensor operator still had a harbor full of boats to destroy before they scattered into the Gulf. He timed his next shot between the swings of a crane arm on the adjacent pier, loading equipment whose operator had fled. The arm swinging in the blast wind like a screen door in a hurricane. Each pass broke the laser for 0.2 of a second. At Mach 1.3, that's 90 m of unguided Hellfire per interruption. He waited for the arm to clear. Designated a midship's rifle. 22 seconds. The crane passed through once. Hellfire activated. Reacquired. Corrected. Terminal. The warhead punched through the Tandar's deck at the missile magazine. Nasser once cooked off in a cascade that hammered a pressure wave across the harbor and ripped open 2 problems at once. Overpressure sheared the landing craft's line. Bow swinging for the harbor mouth at 8 knots with 40 mines on deck and the self-P protection pod chirped. A hot point on the wide-angle display. An infrared signature climbing directly toward the Reaper. The 358 was here and the landing craft was running. What the sensor operator couldn't see, what nobody in the GCS would learn until the debrief, was that a second 358 had launched 40 seconds earlier from a position the Reaper sensors had never covered. It was already at 11,000 feet. The first 358 slid across the display with the unhurried geometry of something that already knows where the target is. The pilot's voice came across flat, the kind of calm you hear from your wife right before she tells you exactly how much you spend on Etsy and called for a break right. The pilot broke hard. The 358 Seeker, cued by the Tander's last transmission before the Hellfire erased the antenna, had been riding the engine plume. 400 m of separation, close enough that the detonating flash filled the display like a second sunrise. RIM 32 arrived on station with 8 fresh Hellfires. Green 31 handed the scattered boats to the new aircraft and locked onto the landing craft. Now past the harbor mouth, accelerating into open water at 12,000 feet with 3 miles of standoff, the Reaper had what the Romeo crews never did: time and distance. No Zu-23 could reach this altitude. No disc gunner could walk tracers toward an engine he couldn't see. The only thing that could touch Grim 31 up here was already closing from the east. Now the sensor operators switched warheads. If you look here at the weapons display, the AGM-114 and Hellfire uses a metal augmented charge, a thermobaric warhead that creates a fuel-air overpressure pulse. Imagine lighting a match inside a flour mill, except the flour is explosive and the mill is a 50 m boat. The laser had to land between the second and third pallet rows. 2 m of precision from 12,000 feet through Gulf haze on an 8-knot target. Missed the deck and those 40 mines reached the strait by nightfall. The missile warning system chirped again. Second 358 bearing 090 10,000 foot closing. 20 seconds to engagement range. The Hellfire needed 24 seconds to reach the landing craft. For seconds of margin between the mission succeeding and the Reaper getting hit. He held. Rifle 24 seconds to impact. The 358 closed from the east. 20 seconds to engagement range. The sensor operator kept the laser welded to the deck plates. Gimbal correcting for drift. Hands lock like threading a needle on a bus going over potholes while someone throws tennis balls at your head. At -6, the pilot commanded a brake as the self-P protection pod threw countermeasures. The inbound track wavered just enough. The Hellfire hit first. Thermal bearing charge on the open deck. Overpressure ripping outward. First pallet. Second. Third. Fourth. Fifth. Bow to stern in under half a second. The landing craft shattered in two when the fireball punched through the Gulf humidity in a white column. The 358 dove into the inferno and vanished. In under 40 minutes, 2 helicopters and 2 drones erased Abu Musa's mining capability and sank the largest mine layer in Bandar Lang's fleet. 60+ mines that would never reach the shipping lanes, enough to close the strait for weeks and send oil prices past anything the global economy could absorb. If you enjoyed this video, watch our other video on the current conflict with Iran. Bye for now.